Today is a practical session. So keep pen and paper ready, and we will have, I would like to welcome today's speakers, Calie Rydings and Nancy Smith, media trainers from Make Water Famous. Welcome, Nancy. Welcome, Calie.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Such a privilege to have you with us today. Welcome to this media training from Make Water Famous as part of the SIWI Water in Communications workshop. Make Water Famous is a non-profit positive news platform specifically for the water sector, and we hope this workshop is a perfect complement to the wider SIWI workshop series, which aims to bring communicators together and provide better opportunities for everyone to connect with experts in the water sector. This practical session will give you the skills and confidence to communicate effectively with the media. These techniques are helpful for professional development and can empower you to speak more confidently in a variety of situations, including networking events, presentations, and external pitches. As Jarell said, my name is Nancy Smith, and I am joined today with my colleague, Calie Rydings. So before we start, we want to get an idea of where in the world people are joining us from. As we know, water challenges are felt differently in different parts of the world, and with that comes unique challenges for communications, as well as opportunities. So Cecile, if you would not mind starting the poll. Quite a lot of people from North America and Europe, as well as Central America, North Africa, Central Africa, Middle East. And as I predicted, no one so much from East Asia or Southeast Asia, just because it's quite early in that part of the world. So we really do have a mixed bag of people here today, which is absolutely fantastic. I'm very excited about that. Okay, next slide. So we want to share a bit about us with you, as what Calie and I do day to day reflects this training now. It is based on real life scenarios, and we are very much experts by experience. So first of all, myself, I studied journalism and human rights at university before studying water security and international development for a postgraduate degree. The postgrad was with the intention to get as far away from journalism and communications as possible, if you can believe it. This is because I really believed at the time that they weren't useful to the mission of ensuring universal water access for everyone. I thought it would be far better if I did something practical, quote unquote, with my time. I soon realized that actually that was incredibly naive and wrong of me, and that there are stories in the world of water, both positive and negative, that aren't being told, and the skills I have are hugely practical to addressing that problem. I started my career working for a water utility company in the UK before joining Make Water Famous and as a content writer, and its sister organisation, Wise on Water, as a technical writer. And I write any and all types of content through formats ranging from press releases to producing podcasts. So that's me, Calie.
Thanks, Nancy. Though I actually started my career in the theatre, I later pursued a postgraduate degree in news journalism. This shift has led to a rewarding career as a national journalist here in the UK. Then in the mid-2000s, I transitioned to the not-for-profit sector, where I held a senior press office role at one of the world's largest and oldest charities. In my time there, I discovered a passion for social impact through communications. I thrived on creating campaigns that raised awareness and drove positive behaviour change. So when I saw a communications opening at a major UK water company, it felt like a perfect fit. During my time at the utility, I built and then ran a large communications and campaigns team. We created several award-winning campaigns around bathing water quality in collaboration with the Environment Agency, and fog and unflushables with the UK's Consumer Council for Water. A few years later, driven by a burning desire to tell wider water stories and be part of the global solution to tackling the water crisis, I became a content and social media editor at Make Water Famous and a senior technical writer at Wise and Water. So now, every day, I work with amazing people and companies all over the world who are bringing inspiring and innovative solutions to the water crisis. When it comes to media training, I've coached spokespeople and helped organizations with their messaging, media and communication strategies. I've media trained CEOs and senior management teams, scientists, technical experts, operators, and other employees at every level of an organization. And don't worry, I don't just bring theory, I bring practical experience too. I've been on the other end of the media many times. I've been interviewed by major news outlets, including the BBC, Channel 4, ITV, and Sky News, as well as appearing on national television shows as a subject matter expert. And I was also invited to give a TEDx talk in 2022. So let's talk about what we're doing in this session and how we can help you in your work.
Thanks, Calie. So today's session will cover 4 specific areas: understanding the media and media bias, media interaction do's and don'ts, the power of storytelling and elements of a successful story, and lastly, we will develop media messages. And we've allowed time for questions and wrap-ups, as well as 2 breaks in between, so we can all make a tea or a coffee or what have you. Okay, just making sure I keep to time. So, why is media engagement important for water professionals? We all experience water crisis differently, and we have a lot of knowledge about these problems within our own contexts. The solutions to those problems too are also increasingly well known, but again, mostly only to us in the sector. What we need to do better is, as a community of water professionals, to communicate that link between the problems and the solutions to the general public. And most importantly, keeping their engagement and bringing them along with us. Calie?
Nancy's right. Our water problems aren't going away anytime soon, but awareness about water's importance and its complexities is often low, especially in developed countries. Good communication about these issues can help rally support, provide vital information, encourage cooperative behaviours, and identify effective solutions, all of which are urgently needed to move the water agenda forward, accelerate progress on tackling the water crisis, and meet our sustainable development goals. So why does the sector struggle to communicate, and what can be done to change the situation? Well, of course, the challenges vary in different regions and across organisations. In my experience, both in the UK and globally, fear plays a large part in the struggle to communicate. The sector, I think it's fair to say, is traditionally quite risk averse and afraid of government, media, or public backlash to innovation and change. In addition, when communicating, people in the water sector often, understandably, think that convincing arguments are made only with data and facts and figures. An aversion to simplifying messages and using effective storytelling can lead to an overuse of complex language and technical jargon.
Thanks, Calie. So this is where I state the obvious, but it's always important to remind ourselves that when we talk about the media, our minds go directly to what we consider to be the traditional formats. So print, broadcast and TV, and online. But now we've got social media, podcasting, the influencers, and AI, and these are very much the wild cards, and we must acknowledge and interact with them, because They can sometimes be unchecked, unqualified, and biased. All these different media formats interact with and have their own target audiences, which will change the way that you tell stories to the media.
Thank you, Nancy. So I think the first thing we're going to do is just give an overview of the journalist and the editor's role. I'm aware that we have many water journalists and specialist communicators with us today, but I think it's still vital that we review in the broadest terms what a journalist's role is and what elements they're looking for in a story. This can help us focus our communications, effectively engage with a wider variety of media, and of course, talk to the general public. When you're at the forefront, it's really easy to forget that every press release, blog, social media post, or media communication, even crafted with a specialist audience in mind, could and will be viewed by a member of the public or even a non-specialist journalist looking for a story. So let's dig into the core role of journalism and what makes a story newsworthy. Journalists act as information intermediaries. They're working to bring newsworthy stories to the public. Their role involves several key tasks. They research and dig into potential stories, often by following leads, conducting interviews with relevant sources, and sifting through documents. In an ideal world, accuracy is paramount. Journalists are expected to confirm information from multiple sources and ensure that their facts are correct before reporting. They are expected to craft compelling stories, translating often complex information into clear and concise writing or broadcast, depending on the medium. And their aim is to keep the public and specialist target audiences informed about current events, issues that affect them, and stories that spark public or professional interest.
Thanks, Calie. So now I'm going to talk about the role of the press office, the public relations personnel, and the marketing role. So that side of the coin is to make stories newsworthy, to attract the attention of journalists and editors. So what makes a story newsworthy? Press officers, PR, and marketing professionals are on the lookout for stories that meet some or all of the criteria that is listed below in the PowerPoint. And this is regardless of the platform or type of media. So when you're looking for a story, you ask, is it timeless? Is it recent or happening right now? What is the impact? Does it affect a large number of people or have significant consequences? Is there conflict or collaboration? Is there a disagreement, controversy, or tension that grabs attention? Or is there a new collaboration or partnership? What is the prominence? Does it involve well-known people or organizations? Is there any human interest? Is it relatable and emotionally engaging for the audience? What is the novelty? Is it something new, unusual, or surprising? Me and Calie have written many silly stories that are related to water, and they are always some of our most popular stories. And lastly, proximity. Is it geographically relevant to the audience location? By combining several of these elements, you can create informative and engaging stories that resonate with your audiences and also attracts journalists and editors to cover that story. Before I move on to the next slide, there are 3 things that me and Calie see again and again, which always makes stories pop. And those 3 things are, for every story, include a high-res landscape picture, high-resolution landscape picture. The second is to have a 7-word headline or less with an active verb. And the third one is to have at least one quote from the most senior person you can find. So we have an example here from Make Water Famous of a story that includes some of the elements I just discussed. And you can see right away, short headline, landscape, high resolution picture. So this is the story itself. And I've highlighted elements in a few paragraphs that cover some of these fundamental elements we need to see in a successful news story. So the Clean Water Sports Alliance covers this collaboration and this prominence element. In the fourth paragraph, we have human interest and proximity. The human interest is how it affects us directly. And the proximity is that it's in the UK. It's you know, where a lot of people are. And a few paragraphs down, we have impact. This alliance aims to influence decision makers and drive positive change. I'll give you all a few minutes to read that story and to take it in before we move on to the next section. Also, what I will do is I will give Jorel the links to all the news articles that we use in this training, so you can look at them in your own time later. Okay, so let's move on to the next section. Media bias. Calie, all yours.
Thank you, Nancy. So, change is constant in the utilities industry, but I think it's fair to say that the pace of change has accelerated in recent years and will continue to do so. So, wherever in the world you are, all of us working in water must navigate a complex path when we're communicating about the challenges we face. The media isn't always intentionally biased when reporting on water issues and the solutions that are emerging. However, media outlets are drawn to stories with conflict or problems. Leaks, pollution incidents, or water price hikes might get more coverage than positive developments or complex challenges the sector faces. In addition, public concern about water issues can influence media coverage, which is something we are very much experiencing here in the UK. Each geography will, of course, have its own challenges with media bias, but here are some of the key issues that we consistently see. Industry bias. Media outlets that rely heavily on advertising might be less likely to report critically on industry practices or regulation. Sensationalism. Some media outlets might focus on the dramatic water pollution events and neglect more widespread but less flashy issues like leakage. And then, of course, there's political bias. Depending on your political landscape, media outlets might choose to frame water issues to align with a particular political agenda. For example, they might downplay the severity of a pollution or highlight the economic impact of stricter regulation. Then, of course, there's geographical bias. Stories about water problems in developing countries get less coverage than those in developed nations. And of course, the complexity of the issue leads to dumbing down. Water issues often, as we know, involve complex technical details and competing interests, which makes them difficult to explain in a digestible format. Of course, there are dedicated journalists all across the world who cover water issues fairly and accurately, but it is up to all of us to keep providing our support and input into accurate and informative reporting on this critical issue. So here are some ways that we can challenge media bias. Transparency and credibility. We want you to be a reliable source of information by providing accurate data, research, and clear communication. This helps build trust with journalists, who are then more likely to seek you out for balanced reporting. Develop relationships with journalists. This builds rapport with reporters who cover your industry. Offer them briefings, interviews with experts, and access to relevant information. Pitch compelling stories. Don't wait to be approached. Proactively identify newsworthy stories related to your work in water and pitch your ideas to journalists. Frame your stories in a way that connects with those broader public concerns. Offer multiple viewpoints. Be prepared to offer a variety of perspectives on water issues within your organisation. This can include scientists, engineers, or community representatives. This is a good one. Fact-checking and corrections. If you see an inaccurate portrayal of the water crisis in the media, why not politely reach out to that journalist with corrections and offer them additional information? Engage directly with the public where possible, because without the gatekeeper of traditional print and broadcast media, you are able to have those conversations directly with customers and consumers. Collaboration. Join forces with other organisations working on water issues to amplify our collective voice and present a united front when we're advocating for change. Last couple of ones. Focus on the solutions. That's something we're very much focused on at Make Water Famous. Don't just point out the problems, offer solutions and highlight examples of best practice in water management. And finally, be persistent. Challenging media bias is an ongoing process. Be prepared to consistently engage with journalists and the public. The important thing to note is that we all have the power to educate the public about the water crisis and the importance of responsible water management through our social media campaigns, educational materials, and public events. We can highlight underreported issues by using our own communication channels to bring attention to water issues that might otherwise be unreported in the mainstream media, particularly those in developing countries. By implementing these strategies, we can all play a part in promoting a more accurate and balanced media coverage of the water crisis.
Great, thanks, Calie. So to show examples of what Calie has just so eloquently said, we have two stories here which are biased, I would say. Would you say that, Calie?
I would agree.
But in different ways, So the first example is from The Guardian online, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's a very high quality news outlet from the UK, quite left-leaning, I would say. And it came up with a recent news article where it is biased against the Environment Agency, which is one of the environmental regulators here in the UK. And they have consistently been against pollution of the rivers and the seas, which of course is a very bad thing. But I think Cecile will put the link to the news article in the chat when she's got time. And over the break that we have next, I invite you all to read this article and to see how it is biased and in what ways it is biased. So you might have just thought that being biased is only for news outlets that are cheap and tacky and don't produce good journalism. The Guardian is an example that that's actually not true. But then also covering pollution is another UK outlet. This is from thedailymail.com. And the first thing you will see, which is a extra no, is the massive headline. And as well as the capital letters for the word cocaine for some reason. Now, this is biased against the water companies, again, on the same subject of polluting rivers and seas in the UK. And over the break, please read this as well, so you can see how this article is biased too. Oh, thank you, Cecile. I've seen you've just put those links in the chat. That's perfect. And as Calie said earlier, they don't focus on the solutions. They're not very positive at all. And they exist solely to put the blame on one particular organisation or company or problem without telling the story in its complete truth, I would say. So with that, after all of our talking, we now have a 15-minute break. So you can make a tea or coffee, read those news articles which are in the chat. And also, if anyone can guess where this picture's from, you will get a gold star.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Calie. Before we go on the break, are there any questions at this point that you would like to have answered now? Or any of the participants have questions or thinking? Evelyn, is a story that is not solution-oriented biased?
That's a great question. And no, not necessarily. I think, as with all of this, and as we will learn as we move forward with this workshop, there are lots of different ways to tell a story, and there are lots of different ways to offer solutions and calls to action. They don't necessarily have to be material solutions. But don't worry, because we will be looking at some of those elements in the next part of the course.
Right, thank you. We already have a guess for the waterfall, but we might have to come back with that after the break.
Hi everyone, welcome back. And if you are joining us just now, hello, welcome. So 2 of you correctly guessed that this picture is from Iceland. I went on there on holiday recently, and for anyone who is nuts about water, it is an absolute paradise. Now, let's move on to the next section. Just do my timer to make sure that we stick to time, very important. Okay, so this is the part of the training where we go over some useful do's and don'ts if you ever find yourself in front of a journalist, either on camera or in an interview situation. We understand that there are journalists and communicators in the room, but we're demonstrating these do's and don'ts from our perspective in the water space. But if anyone has any other do's and don'ts from their perspective, please put them in the chat. So firstly, I will cover the do's. So do be prepared with key messages. Don't rely on spontaneous remarks. Do anticipate questions. Get your colleagues to ask you wild card questions that might come up that you might not have thought of. Always dress professionally, speak confidently, and it is important to consider your audience for the time of day that you're speaking and also the outlet. Is it mainstream or is it trade press? Is it for a small social media interview or is it for an editorial? And lastly, use positive body language. Smile, make eye contact, and use positive gestures. Calie?
Thank you, Nancy. So that's the do's. Let's talk about the don'ts. The first one is don't wing it. You need to be prepared. Don't rely on off-the-cuff remarks. Do your research. Don't use jargon or technical terms. Wherever possible, speak in plain language that an audience, any audience, can understand. Don't say no comment. It sounds very defensive. Instead, you can politely explain why you can't answer. Don't lose your cool. Stay professional and courteous, even when they're asking tough questions. Best one, don't assume anything is off the record. Everything you say to a journalist could be used. Never assume something is off the record, even if they've said it is. And of course, don't speak negatively. Avoid bad-mouthing your competitors or criticizing others. It never works. So we're going to look at what this looks like in practice. Nancy and I are going to give 2 examples of scenarios demonstrating the do's and don'ts by addressing one consistent topic in the water sector. Nancy and I will act out the answers to 2 identical questions. And I bet as you're listening to this that you can think of a time when you've heard both of these styles of answers.
Okay, let's get into character. Calie, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, Miss Rydings, as the CEO of a leading water technology company, you must have some frontline insights. As such, can you elaborate on the severity of the water crisis?
Yes, of course. And thank you for having me today. So last year, I visited a village in Ghana. Women and children walked for miles every day to collect a few buckets of water. A young girl who was probably about the same age as my son told me that she was missing school because she had to go and fetch water. Seeing the desperation on her face about the lack of something that I take for granted here in the UK really hit home for me the human cost of the water crisis. And the problem has no geographical borders because, according to the United Nations, by 2030, nearly half of the world's population will be living in areas experiencing water shortages. So, as water becomes scarcer around the world, especially in poorer communities, we need to manage it smarter. The good news is, by working together and finding solutions that benefit everyone, we can become more resilient to climate change and ensure there's enough water both now and in the future.
Thank you for that. And in your opinion, what is the way forward or the solution to the water crisis?
That's a great question. So, as freshwater becomes more scarce, we'll absolutely need to use water more wisely and differently. We'll need to develop new technologies and change the way we manage our water resources, both in our communities and around the world. In areas that struggle with water shortages, every drop is crucial. Leaks in pipes and infrastructure worsen the problem by wasting precious water, making competition for what's left even tougher. Technology offers us a toolbox of solutions, including advanced tech like satellite images, AI-powered data analysis, and smart sensor networks that can detect everything from major bursts to tiny drops of water, helping to find and fix leaks faster and reduce that water loss. However, technology alone isn't enough to solve this issue. We need a multi-pronged approach. This will include educating people and communities about how to use water more wisely and a greater use of nature-based solutions, which are ways that we can address environmental challenges by working with nature, not against it. So, in the case of water scarcity, this means focusing on using natural processes and ecosystems to conserve, manage, and replenish our water supplies. For example, Nancy, replacing a traditional concrete with materials like gravel allows rainwater to filter down into the ground instead of running off into our drainage system. That helps refresh the groundwater sources and reduce the pressure on our drainage systems, which has the added benefit of reducing pollution. And of course, it might also be necessary to look at where policies and regulation can incentivize responsible water use. To give you an example, in Denmark, they've achieved some of the lowest water losses in the world by instituting a penalty on any losses greater than a 10% leakage threshold. But looking beyond all of these immediate solutions, managing ecosystems, upgrading water distribution infrastructure, and reducing the water footprint of companies and corporations will also be really important pieces of this puzzle. And finally, encouraging international cooperation will help us ensure a united front in tackling this global challenge. It's complex, Nancy, but it can be done.
Thank you so much for your time, Ms. Rydings.
A pleasure. So now I'm going to be asking the same question of Nancy.
One
Miss
second,
Smith.
Calie. Let me just go back to this. Right, someone requested that we put this slide up while we do
Perfect.
our role play. Right, let me get into character.
Okay, are we ready?
Ready.
Miss Smith, as the CEO of an international ENGO, you must have some key insights into the global water picture. As such, can you elaborate on the severity of the water crisis?
Yeah, well, according to the UN, by 2030, nearly half of the world's population will be living in areas experiencing water scarcity. This means limited access to clean water for basic needs like drinking, sanitation, and hygiene. What's more, climate change, population growth, and pollution are all contributing factors as well.
Thank you. So, in your opinion, what's the way forward or the solution to this crisis?
Look, until policymakers align to achieve SDG 6, there may not be much hope, to be honest with you. Unless the solutions that we're all familiar with, obviously, such as desal, water purification, and greywater harvesting, can be scaled up and made more accessible, especially to developing countries, things will keep getting worse. With this, investment costs need to be driven down and ROI needs to be driven up. Actually, while we're here, on a domestic level, individuals need to drive down their triple PD water usage and heighten their value of portable water, right? And water utilities, in turn, need to stop CSOs and stop paying dividends to shareholders and use that capital for biodiversity net gain.
Thank you so much for your time, Nancy. That was very informative.
You're welcome.
So what we're going to do is we're going to pop up a quick poll, and what we're going to ask is, which answer did you prefer? There is no necessarily right or wrong answer here. Was it answer 1 or answer 2? Well, that's very encouraging. Yay.
It's encouraging. You're a fantastic actress, Calie. Well done.
So as was evident by those two very different styles of answers, there are positives and negatives to answering a question like that. What we've tried to do in that is demonstrate the idea of bringing storytelling elements in at the beginning with my answer. I started with the human story and then I made it wider, and then I talked about the practical solutions. What you'll notice is that both Nancy and I both referred to the UN, the United Nations, but I was the only one who explained what that was rather than using the acronym. It may seem obvious to us, but some people may not understand what those acronyms are. So we need to make sure we're explaining them. Another thing that I think was quite important in my example was the fact that what we did is we looked at the macro. We talked about a particular incident, and then we looked at the global picture. Mine was very focused on the positive, proactive solutions. And although I did talk about technology, as Nancy did, we spoke about it in very different ways. I spoke about the way the technology would help communities and help to tackle the issues, whereas Nancy just used the terms without any kind of qualifying information. Nancy, is there anything you want to add to that before we move on to the power of storytelling?
Yes, I want to pick up on the second answer. We might have thought, being in the water sector, that was the stronger answer. But as Calie said, it used so many acronyms that only we as a community understand. It was more passionate. It was a very passionate answer. You could tell the CEO of this environmental NGO really didn't like certain actors in this sector. But that still doesn't mean that you can't be calm and that you can't deliver an answer that is considered to who will be listening to it, shall we say. Do you think, Calie?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So now we're going to start to harness all of this into some learnings. We're going to talk about the power of storytelling. Using storytelling not only informs, but it also inspires action, and was, as we've said, a prominent feature in my example answer. Storytelling is a powerful tool for communication because it taps into fundamental aspects of how humans learn and connect. So here's why it's so effective. We've got the emotional connection. Stories evoke emotions in listeners. It makes them feel more engaged and invested in the message. Facts and figures, they tell, but stories make you feel. When you care about something, you're more likely to remember it. Relatability is very important. Stories allow complex ideas to be broken down into relatable experiences. By using characters, settings, and conflicts, listeners can connect with that story to their own lives and understand the points on a deeper level. Memorability. Dry facts, let's be honest, are, unless you're that way inclined, very easily forgotten. Stories with vivid details and emotional connections are more likely to be both remembered and then shared. And there's science, guys, neuroscience. Studies show that storytelling activates the parts of the brain that are associated with both empathy and understanding. This creates a sense of shared experience between the storyteller and the listener. And of course, storytelling isn't just used by journalists, it's used effectively by a range of people. Teachers use stories to illustrate concepts and make learning more engaging. Politicians, of course, craft narratives to connect with their voters on an emotional level and rally them to their cause. Business leaders, they use stories to inspire employees, motivate their teams, and sell ideas or products. Marketeers leverage their stories to create compelling content that resonates with customers. And then, of course, we have the ultimate storytellers, writers and artists. Storytelling is the very foundation of their craft. It allows them to connect with their audiences through their characters and their narratives. Even in everyday conversations, we all use stories to explain situations and share experiences and connect with other people. So we're going to give you some examples of how you can weave a story into your messaging. Over to you, Nancy.
Okay, so there are sessions in this series on video storytelling and science communications, which we highly recommend that you watch as a complement to this section. But what we're going to focus on now are the elements that in mainstream media make successful stories, such as using compelling narratives, highlighting human impact, and showcasing the benefits of a solution. We're going to do this by analysing storytelling news that have appeared in the mainstream media and see what makes them successful, and also what learnings we can take away from them. So, if you bear with me 1 second.
Thank you. Yes, so the first thing that I should tell you is that this is one of the most read stories for the last 12 months on the Make Water Famous website. And that's not just for our UK readers, but also globally. It's interesting. Let's dig into why. So it starts with a really good hook that grabs the reader's attention and it makes them want to read more. This is the hook. Water infrastructure from the Victorian age has met with 21st century digital technology to build resilience for a community high on the moors of West Yorkshire. It's exciting. It's telling you everything you need to know. There's a clash of old and new. We know exactly where in the landscape it is. We're there with the community. It uses throughout the text clear and concise language that a broad audience can understand. The story gets to the point really quickly in highlighting the key information that we want to know. These are who, what, where, when, why, and how. They all are answered in the first 2 paragraphs. The article, as you'll see, uses real people and their stories to illustrate what is actually a story about the broader issue of water security and the importance of technology and collaboration in tackling it. By centering it around the work of the community and those individuals, rather than the technology, it makes the news more relatable and more emotionally engaging. It, throughout the copy, uses vivid details and lovely descriptions to paint a picture in the reader's mind. And I'll pluck out an example from somewhere halfway through the text. So this is it. The solution took not just 21st century digital know-how, but plenty of 19th century hard graft. The information, as you'll see as Nancy scrolls, is laid out in a very clear and logical way. It guides the reader through the story. It's got a mix of sentence lengths, which keeps the eye engaged, keeps the writing interesting. It avoids monotony. And it has great use of pull-out quotes and subheadings and strong images throughout the text, with people in them, which helps keep the reader engaged. Nancy, do you have another that you're going to show?
I do, yes. The second story, because it's not all about us, we did look at other outlets as well. So this story, can you see this Al Jazeera story? Yeah?
Yes.
Great. This story caught my eye. It is a very kind of sad story about how Mexico City is sinking, but I thought it was such a fantastic way to tell a story. I simply had to put it in this in our workshop. So this story, in the first paragraph here, the first 2 paragraphs, it starts by setting up the scene to make the reader feel like they're actually in Mexico City looking at these buildings. Also, which is quite interesting about this story, is that it uses you statements. You feel like you're walking in the streets. You can see the buildings. And that makes a personal connection for the reader to this story. The text is broken up. It's not intimidating to read. It's very small paragraphs. And the reader is led through with subheadings, very similar to Calie's example from Make Water Famous. This story is also very visual. There are so many pictures, and they're very well described as well throughout the story. And again, as you can see, landscape, high resolution images. And lastly, what I also enjoy about this story is that throughout there are links to other stories as well as studies so that the reader can further educate themselves, which is very important, I think, in a long form story like this. Cecile is now adding the link to this and will do to the other stories as well. So when we come to our break, you can read them. The last story that we have, as an example, is the CNN one, which is hidden. Oh, got it. Okay, so this is a positive news story about this Scottish company that creates these floating islands of vegetation to enhance otherwise bland and sad open water spaces. It starts by setting up the context by describing a global picture, talking about all the different rivers that we have in the world and why they're so important. It speaks to the reader directly in the second paragraph by describing a context that we're all familiar with, COVID and being at home and not being able to go out. And that's very familiar to us, and it creates this emotional connection. And I love these before and after pictures. Everyone loves a before and after picture, don't they? And it really helps to show the success of their project around the world. It is very, very visual in that way. And further down, what I also enjoy about this story is once it's set up the context and told you the who, what, where, and the why, it goes into further detail about the benefits of this technology, why greening cities is important, and how it creates thriving waterside communities. And again, yes, Cecile has put that link in the chat. Thank you very, very much for that. So with that, we will go back to the presentation. Let me share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Great. And before we know it, it's already another 10-minute break. Great. So take this time to dissect those stories, to read them at your leisure. And then we will come back for our final section, which is developing media messages. And we will then go into a Q&A, which we've allowed as longer time than normal for. And then we will have our wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is a question from before we went on to the break, which we will address. And the question is, one of the biggest struggles facing all of us is being able to cut through into the very busy media environment. For us, the volume of what we issue ourselves is large, and we've had to look at that. How do we become a trusted voice or even cut through the myriad of news articles to get ours across? One way that helped us was to create regional stories, but are there any other suggestions?
Yeah, so I think, again, kind of tapping back into some of the things that we spoke about in the first section of the workshop. So that's all around building meaningful relationships with journalists. I think we very often as communicators think that if we scattergun, if we throw out lots of information, something will stick. In actuality, having a more targeted and positive, proactive relationship with your key media outlets is going to be the most important thing to ensure the penetration of your media articles. So the ways that we suggest doing this is obviously, for a start, contacting journalists with good quality stories that are relevant to their audience, and also crucially are set out in the way in which they write their copy. So what we see a lot as journalists and editors is press officers, and I was a press officer, so this is not a criticism, but often press officers would send a piece of information. It wouldn't have quotes in it, it wouldn't be written in the style of the publication that they wanted it to go in. It would include links to various things, huge files with images in that had no people in, no pictures of what they were talking about. So if you're expecting a journalist to pick up that piece of information and put a lot of work into shaping it to suit their publication or their outlet, the chances are, unless it is the most exciting story they've ever seen, they are not going to go to the effort. So the key thing that we can do to make sure that we are getting coverage of the things we're putting out is to write really good quality copy that is journalist ready, that they don't have to do anything to. And actually, one of the things with my Wise on Water hat on that we see quite a lot is that when we put something together with a client and we see the end product of that press release, we know we are successful when they haven't changed a word of what we've put in, that our headline has remained unchanged, our strap line is unchanged, everything that we've given them is included in that piece. We know that we have presented this one outlet with the perfect piece of copy. So to wrap that up, my suggestion would be, don't focus on breadth, focus on depth. Make good quality copy that suits the outlets that you want it to go to and you want it to appear in, and build meaningful relationships with journalists that work there. Go to them and say, what do you want to hear about? We've got an expert who can talk about it, and give them good quality copy.
Fantastic answer, Calie. I could not have said it better myself. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so we're going on to section 5 now, which is developing media messages. So you have something to share that you think should be in the media or form part of your communications. The question is always, where do you start? When developing media messages on any water topic, you can start by considering these key points listed in this PowerPoint presentation slide here and writing down your answers accordingly. So focus on establishing 1 to 3 clear and concise key messages. Make it very memorable, short and simple, and if it's to be delivered on screen or on social media, under 15 seconds. Don't just tell, show, so back up your claims with personal stories if you can. Forget dry rhetoric. It's very boring. Weave in relatable anecdotes to illustrate your key points. People crave connections, and personal stories make your message relatable and memorable, which reflects what Calie was saying earlier. Prepare again for challenging questions and testing the message before. These are essential for assuring effectiveness. Check your clarity. Is it easy to understand? Is it free of jargon? I always call this the mum test. If I want something to be quite universally understood, I'll tell my mum about it over tea or coffee. And if she understands, I know I'm definitely on the right track. Inspiration station. Does it spark interest? Does it motivate action? And lastly, creating that emotional connection. Does it resonate with the audience on a deeper level? So, for the last workshopping element of this training, we are going to workshop developing media messages. And to show you what that looks like in practice by brainstorming what we regard to be 2 of the most relevant water topics for the sector right now, and they are water scarcity and water pollution. So Calie is going to cover water scarcity first.
So let's talk about water scarcity, and what we're looking for you guys to do is to pop some thoughts into the chat system now. So we want to kind of try to drill down what are our key messages as a sector about the issue of water scarcity. It's a complex issue, we know this, but we also need to be able to communicate more effectively about it. We've all seen the emotive headlines talking about day zero or the wars that will be fought over water, which we know can leave readers feeling powerless. They disengage from these problems. So what we need to do as a sector is develop really well-rounded media messages. What I'd like you to do as I'm talking, and I'm going to talk you through what I believe to be the key points that we want to weave into our media messaging. And do feel free, as I say, as I'm talking, throw in ideas as we go. So the first one is we need a statement or a key message that takes into account the fact this is a global issue. Although we all face regional issues, it is much wider than that. Water knows no boundaries. So how can we tell people that water scarcity is a growing problem that affects regions all around the world, not just in limited areas? How can we as communicators talk about those multiple causes of water scarcity in a way that is clear and consistent and engaging? We know that it's caused by a combination of factors: increasing demand due to population growth, poor water management, and climate change all impact on our water scarcity. How do we put that into one clear, concise message? How can we as communicators encapsulate the human impact of water scarcity? Because there's no point in talking about the problem unless we talk about the people that it's impacting. So we know that there are some big figures out there. Billions of people already lack access to clean water, and water scarcity threatens billions more. We also know that water scarcity has a direct impact on human health, on sanitation, even on other sectors and industries, for example, food security. How can we use our key messages to put this complex problem across? We also want to make sure when we're putting together key messages on water scarcity that we talk about, all of us, the unequal burden that is felt here, and the fact that the poorest communities, and very especially women and girls, are often hit hardest by water shortages. We want to make sure that we in developed countries are talking about this as much as people in developing countries and give a united front. And then, of course, going back to that idea of when we're doing our key messages, we always want a call to action or a reason why we're doing this thing. So what urgent action is needed to tackle water scarcity? In your key messages, we want you to discuss the sustainable solutions, how collaboration is required, and how communities and individuals can manage water more wisely.
Thanks, Calie. So the next big topic that we wanted to focus on when crafting a media message is water pollution. And similar to Calie, if you have any ideas for what elements should go into this messaging, please put them in the chat. We chose water pollution because in the UK at the moment, the narrative on water pollution has been running wild, quite frankly, for the last few years. And varying media messages have allowed the picture to become very confusing and muddled. And we want to address that and figure out if there is a perfect way to craft a media message on this topic. And we think there is. We think it is important to do your research first and to make sure that you have a clear picture of the pollution story before you start making your media message. And do not cherry pick statistics and facts that agree with your narrative. Recognize early where the issues of pollution are coming from and ensure that you check them for clarity. And I think many countries in the world have a pollution problem in some way, shape, or form. So these do translate to other contexts. We would start by clearly explaining the full picture to the audience beforehand, rather than immediately diving in with saying, these people are bad, this is what's happening, we must stop it. Also, with water pollution, it's very important to remember that things change. So once you acknowledge the whole picture, you need to understand that the media message you actually end up with might not reflect what you originally set out to say. For example, you might have wanted to place the blame of the pollution on a business, but then it emerges that it's actually government policy that's ultimately to blame. And again, like water scarcity, put the lights on the solutions to the pollution, as well as obviously highlighting the negatives. And it's important as well to use external expertise for quotes and sources, rather than only trying to get the quote unquote baddies or the quote unquote goodies to engage with you, because of course with that comes their own bias, and sometimes they don't even want to talk to you. No one's put anything in the chat, Calie. So do you have anything else to say on water pollution before we move on to our next section?
No, I think that's covered everything really well. And I think the important thing here, you know, for the communicators and journalists and communications teams in the room, a lot of the work that we do is about working with experts across our organizations to try and really drill down not just the things that we want to say as an organization, but also strategically how that reflects back on our businesses and organizations. So Nancy and I absolutely understand that when we as communicators are crafting our media messages, we are bringing in a lot of people's opinions, a lot of feedback from a lot of different individuals and actors throughout this process. So what we would ensure that you do, and the advice that we would give when you're putting together any key messages for your organization on these big issues, is bring in all of that information, bring in all of those experts, collate all of their information, but also it is okay to understand that you are an expert. It is your final decision what the tone of that piece is, whether it is appropriate for the audience. You will have the best understanding of the media landscape, and probably actually your customers and you know, clients, how they feel about the situation. So always keep those things in mind, that underneath it all, you are the expert, and it is your decisions that will make the difference between the effectiveness of your key messaging.
I would say as well, just to finish this off, that it's also quite important to try and distance yourself personally and kind of emotionally from the story. Being subjective in this space is very difficult, and people always debate even if it's even possible. But just because you might want to say, put the polluters in jail, for example, or these really powerful things, doesn't mean that that is the right thing to say. You have to approach a media message with a degree of kind of autonomy and objectiveness. Okay. So we move on now towards the end of our workshop, and we want to give you a chance to reflect on what we've been learning during the last hour and a half. I can't believe it's gone so quickly. And in the chat, we welcome you to say, for you, what the main thing that you will take away from this workshop to help get your water stories to the top of the news agenda. So please feel free to type them in the chat and we can read them out as they come in. Oh, from the last section, someone has put, one way that we could address water scarcity within rural areas is by having community boreholes and water holding systems that could hold high quantities of water to help the supply of water. Very solution focused. I love that. And someone, Emma, has said, leakage is a challenge as well, as it forms part of the solution to help water conservation. But it isn't the only thing. And there is no such thing as zero leakage. So true. And we need to be saying this, because I think the public very much think, just fix all the pipes and everything will be fine. No, it's not a silver bullet. And that comes with that great understanding and education that is so vital to these media messages. Emma's also put, being open and transparent and building relationships really helps. We also find having stakeholders who will come out and support you of statements independently also helps. That's perfect.
I think that really taps back into the collaboration and united voice that we think is so important for all of us communicating about water. It's, one voice saying something can get lost. All of us saying the same thing at the same time in the same way is far more powerful.
Further up, someone commented, I think combining water scarcity and pollution would be useful. For example, demand of your government curbing water pollution in order to help water resilience.
That's a fantastic point. And I think, one of the things that is so fascinating about the complexity of water communications is that we know, for example, that floods and drought are two sides of the same coin. And actually the solutions for both exist in the middle. So when we're talking about one specific water issue, if there is an interrelated issue that we can also talk about, let's do that, because the more people understand that all of our issues are interconnected and have solutions that can work on every side, the more we're able to give a full and rounded picture.
Loving all these comments. Peter has said, hi, we kind of did some work that touched on water pollution and how it affects fisheries for school. We couldn't get in touch with experts given the deadlines, so our alternative was to rely on literature on the specific body of water we were dealing with. Luckily, it's a well-studied area and we found a whole book detailing its history with pollution. Research, 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 research. So important. What else have we got? Someone has said, Valentina has said, I think tying in and focusing on a story as well as communicating in a positive solution-based language is something that she will take away from this training. Heidi has said, transboundary multilateral water movement is an important story. For example, upstream American draw from the Colombian River has been denying fresh water, making it to Mexico, and the migration and border policies and stories are ignoring and not allowing public awareness to connect. That is one of the reasons for the human crop crisis in Mexico. Elsa says, my takeaway relates to the most simple idea that we as PR communicators have to not just tell, but allow how to feel. Not a simple task when working in a corporate environment. I completely understand where you're coming from there, Elsa. Great, we've got some key takeaways related to the best way to answer questions within an interview. Always prepare for the unexpected and control our emotions when answering. I'm a very guilty person of not doing that. So it does take an extra effort for me. Okay, we have a question. This just folds great into our Q&A section, so I'm just going to keep going. Gabrielle says, you mentioned that the press officer makes stories newsworthy to attract journalists. How can press officers ensure that the journalist and editor won't change too much of a piece or the initial message and intention of the story? Yes,
Great
Gabriella,
question.
sorry, you do understand correctly the roles, Gabriella, you're spot on.
So it's a great question. And again, I know we've sort of touched on some of these elements throughout the workshop, but let's really drill down into the role of a press officer and how they can make sure that their communications go into the media in the way they're hoping. So my key points, both as a press officer for a huge national charity and also running a media team for a water utility, is this. The first one is you need to get to know people really well within your organization. You need to know the right people for the right quotes. So they don't necessarily have to be the most senior person, but they do have to be the person that is the most switched on to what you're trying to achieve and what the key issues are. You need to work to build your relationships internally before you can have success externally. Once you've got your group of VIPs within your organization that you know you can go to for reliable quotes, reliable sources, reliable information, and actually who can put you in touch with other experts outside of your organization so that you can build that piece. So once you start writing your press release, we go back to the fundamentals of journalism. We make sure that that headline is not too long, is active, and is suitable for the publication that you want it to go into. You follow all of the tenets of journalism. You answer the questions who, what, when, where, why, how in the first couple of parts of your story. You provide really good quality pictures so the journalist doesn't have to chase you. And I've mentioned this a couple of times, but you make sure there are people in your pictures. I can't tell you how many times when I worked at the water utility that we would be doing a very big, very emotive story about pollutions or water shortages or, a temporary usage ban. And I would ask somebody on the team to send me a picture from the ground. And they would literally send me a picture of their feet and a hole. Those things are not engaging. They're not engaging to the media, and they're certainly not engaging to the public. What we wanted in that situation is a member of your team in their PPE, in their workwear, doing something, actively fixing the problem. So making sure that you have the right assets for that journalist. And again, and I know this is a point that I raised earlier, but not sending your press release as an attachment that they have to download or interact with in any way. When you send your email to that journalist, put your press release in the body of that email, get it straight in front of them straight away. And then my final point would be, make sure you keep up to date with your media lists. You know exactly who your go-to journalists are at every publication you want to see your story in. So build those lists, nurture them, make relationships with journalists, and write copy like a journalist. Write it exactly as you would expect to see it in a newspaper.
That's great, Calie. Thank you. Someone raised the point of there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to research and data regarding water scarcity. And by the time it comes out, it can be irrelevant because something really bad has happened and that data is no longer useful. How can you take the water stories further and continue to build on the story?
I think that's a great question. And actually, what it really does highlight in the question is the solution. So, being able to communicate the fact that this is a constantly changing, constantly evolving, very challenging situation where the data that we might have today may not be relevant tomorrow is part of the story. It's okay for us as communicators to tell journalists this, to go, I'm giving you this piece of information today, but the fact is, because everything is changing so fast, it may be obsolete tomorrow. If I get new information, I'm going to call you back and update you. So what you're doing is you're not only giving the wider picture that this is ever changing and very complex, you're also building trust with the journalist because you're telling them that if you get more information, you will go to them first and you'll let them know. These are all crucial parts of this conversation.
I will say as well that in my experience, when it comes to researchers who write theses and papers that go into journals, they really want to talk because they do want their research to go further. And they always, for the most part, provide their personal email, their work email addresses onto their paper. So they're very easy to get in contact with and they're very open and will give you up-to-date research and statistics and facts if things have changed from the paper. I don't know if you find that, if you've found that, Calie.
Absolutely. I have to say, researchers are my favourite people to work with.
Mine too. Mine too. Okay, great. Let's see what else we have. Heidi has asked, can there be a written script of this fast-paced training? I'd love to be able to really digest the many pragmatic points. Yes, you're in luck because we have developed an actual script for this training, specifically for SUI. So I will send that to Joelle and she can add it to the resources, and the recording that will be sent after. Let me just see here. Emma has commented, another thing is that your overall comms strategy should help shape your messaging at each stage. We always need to come back to what is at the core of what we communicate and what we want to achieve. We had great info on research around climate change and how it is becoming too overwhelming for people. Having solutions and practical things that can empower people also helps, especially if you are trying to communicate a call to action. Yeah, that really reflects what me and Calie talked about in making those clear messages, because people can feel very powerless, especially when it comes to climate change and water scarcity, but highlighting everyday actions that people can do. We had a really great article last summer. Do you remember, Calie, with the dog under the shower?
Yes, the water saving.
Yeah, about ways to save water, and that did really well. Very small hints and tips for how people can save water day to day is always going to be very popular, because it gives people a sense of agency in this mess of what you see on the news headlines and the dramatic headlines.
And I think picking apart the other part of that comment just now, Nancy, we as communicators know that communications is vital and should be embedded at every part of your organization's process. We should be at every table. We should know everything that's going on. We should be able to prepare. We should be able to be strategic. Unfortunately, we also know that sometimes communication is seen as the cherry on the top of the cake, not the cake itself. So one of the things that we can all do as communicators is continue to put ourselves in that room to make sure that we're there, finding out right at the beginning, what is your organization's strategic objectives and how can communications help you to achieve those?
Perfect, thank you. Thanks, Calie. Yes, Emma said, I could not agree more, Calie.
Thanks, Emma.
I'm going to concur. So we do have still a few minutes left. So if there are any last moment comments or questions, please, now is the time. Emma's come up with a good point, actually. Measuring the success is important. Calie, how do you think, let's say you have a communications campaign that you want your company to do. What is the best way of measuring whether that has been successful or not?
Oh, this is my favorite question. Emma, gold star for you. I'm the data nerd at Wise on Water and Make Water Famous. It's my favorite thing. So yes, data and analytics is so important in all of your communication strategy at every point. I'm very much of the opinion when it comes to communications that we test, we try different things, we take the data and we understand what's working, and then we shape and we iterate our messaging based on that. None of us will ever get every single thing we put out right first time. So what we need to do is we need to look at what data is available to us to make some decisions about how we enhance those communications. So, for example, some of the ways that we can do that, obviously, if we're putting out our communications via social media, there are many platforms that allow us to take analysis and data from that. We can see how far the reach has gone. We can see what the engagement is. So we can see how many times someone has clicked on our post or interacted with it in some way, expressed an opinion or shared something. So we're able to see, is my post reaching the right audience? And is it engaging that audience once it gets there? Social media is almost easier in that sense because we have the data at our fingertips. When it comes to dealing with traditional media, there's a couple of things that we can do. There are a number of agencies that will do that work for you. So you can bring somebody in to tell you how far your coverage has gone, how many people have read it. So we can collate that into a nice report for the board. Other things that we can do to measure the success, and this is something we spoke about earlier, is when you look at your press release that you put out there, did it land with the media organizations that you sent it to? Did they pick it up? That's the first measure of success. If they did they change much of what you wrote? That's the second measure of success. If they wrote your story, did they give it a positive, a neutral, or a negative sentiment to that story? Those are all things that we can measure and we can do ourselves. So what I would urge people to do is absolutely empower themselves to embrace the importance of data at every point in your communications journey. Check as much as you can, test things, try different messaging, see if you get more engagement or more pickup with one thing than another, and adjust your strategy based on that.
Is it worth mentioning Coverage Book, Calie, as a software that can be used?
Absolutely. So there are a number of software, and I'm sure many people in this group will already be aware of a variety of companies that will collate your media coverage for you and then provide you with data and insights. At Wise and Water, we use Coverage Book. Other companies are available.
We are not endorsing.
We're not endorsing. But the important thing to remember is that each organization will have slightly different needs. You might have a board that really likes a very crunchy summary. They want lots of information very, very fast. So actually a company that collates that once a month might not be right for you. You might want to choose a company where you can go in and dig into that data yourself rather than wait for a report to come. But again, working with experts across other parts of communication, so working with an expert media monitoring service, working with an expert external communications agency that specialize in strategy and data and analysis, and bringing them on board as part of your toolkit will also be really important.
Thanks, Calie. So we have just a few minutes left now. So I will take this opportunity to say thank you so much to everyone that attended today and made it a very enjoyable session for both of us and gave your insightful comments and asked very good questions indeed. You can follow Make Water Famous and get in touch with us at any time. We're over all the socials, LinkedIn, Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and we also have our own website. And if you have any stories that you would like to share, you can contact us anytime. And similarly, if you feel that we can benefit your organisation in any way, please do let us know as well. So I will hand back to Jorrol and we will say thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
And I say thank you very much for this very inspiring and very interesting and fun session. A lot of good feedback in the chat and a lot of knowledge to take home. Thank you so much for joining us at Water in Communications. And thanks to all of you who's been joining us today from all over the world. It's always a great pleasure to have you. We have one more workshop left this week, and it is on Thursday. So I will see you on June 27. We will then speak more about climate communication, AI, and storytelling. And we will be having Philip Beetlestone back from Seawe to link us all to World Water Week. Thanks a lot to Calie and Nancy. Thanks to Cecile. Thanks to the Grundfos Foundation. And I see you Thursday. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.